Welcome, fellow Stardust. Are you ready for a scare? I see you've come back for more. If you're new here, buckle up. And thank you all for joining me today. My name is DeRay, lover of all things dark, creepy, and weird. Today's true crime story will be on Jim Jones and the Jonestown Massacre. I mean no disrespect to any of the families mentioned in this story. I simply like doing research on cases like these and sharing my findings. While I tell you his story, I'll be showing you how I did these nails. I used IBD's hard gel over my natural nail while using forms and using an LED light. Alright then, let's get started. Jim Jones was born to James Thurman Jones and Lynetta Putnam in Creek, Indiana. His dad was injured in World War II in France. Mustard gas scarred his lungs. For the rest of his life, he just took whatever odd jobs he could find, and he had a gambling addiction. His mom was the breadwinner and worked in a factory. She never wanted a family and was a bit of an activist. She went to work early and stayed late. Jim never received love from either of his parents since they were never around. He was the weird, dirty little boy of the neighborhood that people avoided when they could. At about 5 years old, he started to hold funerals for neighborhood pets and other animals. Some neighborhood kids recall him killing a cat. He was obsessed with death and religion. He also recognized his ability to manipulate people and honed in on this skill. On hot days, he would use lemonade to lure kids into his backyard. When he was able to get a group of kids together, he wouldn't let them leave for hours, sometimes holding them hostage and locking them up in a closet, even shooting them with a BB gun. He started to get the attention of his mom once she saw how commanding he could be. He started to wear a long robe and his Sunday best every day. He also caught the attention of his neighbor, Myrtle Kennedy, who took him to the Church of Nazarene. This furthered his obsession with religion. He started to preach at the age of 12 and really focused on social injustice and appealed to the African American community. This caused tension with his father, who was in the Ku Klux Klan. One day, his father wouldn't let one of Jim's black friends in the house, and this caused a fight, after which he didn't talk to his father for years. It was a shock to the black community to see a teenage boy preaching about equality for black folks. He started to shop around at different churches until he found the Pentecostal church. It was his favorite. They were accepting of everyone. They took in the rejected like him. They were derogatorily called the Holy Rollers by other religious sects. Pentecostalism has only been around since the early 1900s. They were one of the first religions to ordain women into positions of power. They believe salvation is achieved through Jesus and that healing is possible through him and that he is returning. It's one of the fastest growing religions on earth today. They also believe that when someone is speaking in tongues, that Jesus has descended unto them. When Jim was 16, his mom left his dad and took Jim with her to Richmond, Indiana. There he started working at an assisted living facility. To those in charge, he was a star employee, but to his peers, he wasn't. He would hurt people behind closed doors. While working there, he became interested in a young religious nurse in training named Marcy. Jim graduated early with honors in 1948 at the age of 17. He went to Indiana University, and the next year he married Marcy. Right after the wedding, he became verbally abusive toward her. He began to tell her social justice was more important and started to put down her religion. While in college, he was constantly in the library reading books about Karl Marx, Gandhi, Hitler, and Father Divine. While he didn't agree with the Holocaust, he was impressed by how Hitler was able to command an audience when he spoke. At one point, he even tries to scam Father Divine's family when he passed away in the 70s because they were close friends and he thought he could pull one over on them. Social injustice became more and more important to him. He knew that religion was a way to get to people to listen to him, and then he could persuade people to see things the way he did, a more communist view. He wanted to use religion to break people away from the arms of religion itself. He became a student pastor at a Methodist church, which was a surprise to him because they were aware of his communist views. He soon wanted to leave the church because they wouldn't integrate and let black folks in. He then attended a Seventh-day Baptist church. He saw and liked how it attracted people and their money. Soon after, he put together a convention and invited Reverend William Branham, who was a healing evangelist and religious author. He knew that he would bring in a large crowd. After the convention, he had enough money to start his own church, Community Unity. It would later be called the People's Temple Christian Church Full Gospel, or the People's Temple. It was in an interracial neighborhood. He started to practice healing, and those closest to him were skeptical of his newfound abilities. A few years later, he got a loan to open a church in an actual church building with stained glass. The church actually did a lot of good for the community. They had a soup kitchen, a clinic, a daycare, and they fed the poor. Women held positions of power and controlled million-dollar accounts, things they would never have the opportunity to do in the real world. Jim and Marcy had a biological son and named him Stephen Gandhi Jones, and adopted an African-American boy and named him Jim Jones Jr. He called them twins. They were the first white couple in Indiana to adopt a black child. They also adopted 3 Korean children and a Native American child. Jim Jones called his family the Rainbow Family. In 1960, Indianapolis Mayor Charles Boswell appointed Jim Jones as the director of the local Human Rights Commission. He loved the attention and fame this position brought him. He was told by the mayor and others to keep a low profile, but that's exactly what he didn't do. However, he did do good work. He desegregated restaurants, a theater, the telephone company, the Indiana Police Department, and a theme park, as well as Indiana University Health Methodist Hospital. Also in the 60s, he started to become paranoid that a nuclear attack would occur. He read an article that listed the 9 safest places to be in the event of a nuclear attack. 2 places on the list were Ukiah, California, and a village in Brazil. He then moves 140 of his followers to Ukiah to safety and make sure that they are set up. He then takes his immediate family to Brazil to scout a new location for his temple. They end up stopping in Guyana and help feed the poor while also getting things ready for the temple to move there. After 2 years in Brazil, his associate preachers are able to convince him to come back to California because people are leaving the church. When he returns, he's more paranoid than ever. He starts to worry that people are looking at him in a negative light. Jim would have sex with whoever he wanted to in the church, male, female, or otherwise. He would tell his followers that he was the only heterosexual on the planet and that everyone else was a homosexual. It was said he didn't necessarily enjoy having sex with men and preferred having sex with women, but this is contradicted later when he's arrested for soliciting sex in a male bathroom at a movie theater. He would assert his power by telling a room of his followers to stand if they had had sex with him. If you were still sitting and had had sex with him, he would call you out. However, he didn't allow for his followers to have sex with each other if they weren't married. He felt that it distracted them from their bigger mission. Everyone called him father, and while he had his immediate family, he considered everyone to be one big, happy family. There were regular whippings at the church on the carpet. If someone broke a rule, they would be called up to the front to receive their punishment in front of everyone. He justified these punishments, saying that it was happening mostly to the misfits, and it was a better alternative than handing them over to the cops, who would do much worse. People praised him for leading them out of a life of addiction and poverty. And while these things were true, he was also taking all of their money. People handed them their entire lives, their paycheck, their house, and their banking info. People would work their regular 40-hour-a-week jobs and then also work another 40-plus hours for the temple's people. They handed over their paychecks to Jim and then would receive only a $5 allowance for the week. He had tens of churches up and down the coast of California with huge followings in the tens and thousands and possibly even hundreds of thousands. In San Francisco, he got up to 3,000 followers. His attacks against Christianity became more frequent. He said it was a flyaway religion and that it oppressed non-whites and women. He started to deny that there was a God, but also said he was the reincarnation of Gandhi, Jesus, and Buddha. At this point, he's definitely starting to lose it. He says, quote, "What you need to believe in is what you can see. If you see me as your friend, I'll be your friend. As you see me as your father, I'll be your father. For those of you that don't have a father, if you see me as your savior, I'll be your savior. If you see me as your God, I'll be your God." In 1972, he felt he needed more energy when talking to his followers, so he started to take amphetamines, which he became addicted to and worsened his paranoia. He kept his drug use a secret from most people in the church. Eventually, he felt he couldn't expand the way he wanted to in Ukiah, California, so he moved the headquarters to San Francisco. He continued to be in the public eye as a way to build influence and grow his following. He ordered his members to work election campaigns and to participate in social justice demonstrations. He quickly became chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority. He rubbed shoulders with political leaders like First Lady Rosalind Carter, Harvey Milk, presidential candidate Walter Mondale and Angela Davis. His continued fame brought public praise for the temple. Also in 1972, a few of his followers left and went to the media with their experiences. A magazine was ready to publish an article that would expose his church as a cult, and that there were money issues and that Jim Jones was a false prophet. This was one of his biggest fears, public humiliation. He was able to pull a few strings and the article wasn't published. News reporter Marshall Kilduff continues his investigation of the People's Temple, though. He starts to get random calls from strangers telling him to stop looking into Jim Jones and that he was doing God's work. The arrest mentioned earlier for sex solicitation was with an undercover cop and was also sealed. That, coupled with Kilduff's threats, intensified Jones' paranoia. It seemed he foreshadows the events that were to happen on November 18th. In a sermon in San Francisco, he's quoted saying, "I love socialism and I'm willing to die to bring it about. But if I did, I'd take 1,000 with me." In 1977, Kilduff had a second expose and this time it was published. Jones started to move small groups to Jonestown. It's said that it's obvious that he knew he was a bad guy, but he didn't want anyone else thinking that. In the early 70s, a couple reached out to law enforcement in hopes of getting their son back from the People's Temple. Jim Jones forced the husband to sign a paper saying that he was biologically Jones's and that the father wasn't able to impregnate his wife. They were overlooked, but finally, in 1978, a group called Concerned Relatives is formed, and they reach out to Congressman Leo Ryan for help. Leo Ryan immediately jumps on the case. Congressman Ryan was a very involved man and did a lot for our country. After the Watts riot, he became a substitute teacher to investigate the conditions. He also spent time in California prisons as an inmate to investigate conditions there. He also investigated the inhumane killings of SEALs and the lack of congressional oversight of the CIA. Ryan agrees to go to Jonestown to gather information. By this time, Jones has his whole following in Jonestown. Over 900 people, 300 of them are children. It took a year for Jones to finally allow Ryan to come visit. In 1978, Ryan finally makes it to South America with the TV and news crew and some of the concerned relatives. On his way there, Jim Jones begins to prep his followers and tells them how to answer possible questions from the media. He warns not to be too pro-Soviet or too anti-American with their answers. At this point, many of his followers realize he's really gone completely crazy and they just want out. They saw Ryan's visit as an opportunity to escape. On the last night of Ryan's visit, a defector, Vernon Gosney, slips a note to one of the cameramen thinking that it was Ryan. A child saw him do this and called out, "He passed a note, he passed a note." This caused suspicion and he was questioned about it. Ryan assured Gosney that he'd be on the next plane out of Jonestown in the morning. Gosney warned that they should leave that night, but Ryan was unaware of the dangers ahead and tries to reassure him again. The next morning, after Marcy gave the group a tour of the compound, a total of 15 people stepped forward to leave with the camera crew and concerned relatives. Ryan planned to stay behind to try and get more defectors to step forward. As the group was about to leave, Ryan was attacked by someone with a knife, but was unharmed. Jones and his most devoted followers were angry that people would betray them and leave. Ryan decided not to stay and instead left with the group. At this time, Jones's sons, Stephen and Jim Jones Jr., were not in Jonestown. They were in Guyana for a basketball game. Jones tried to get his sons to come back to Jonestown, but Stephen knew something wasn't right and refused. He was one to recognize that his father had lost his mind. As Ryan's group boards the airplane, a truck full of gunmen opens fire on them. Leo Ryan and 4 others were killed and 11 were wounded. Everyone ran into the jungle for safety and stayed there until nightfall when they thought it was safe. When the gunmen returned to Jonestown and informed Jones that the congressman was dead, he put his plan into action. Jones ordered that the cyanide mixture be made immediately. He convinces his people that because the congressman was dead, that they would be coming after them next, and that they would take their children and convert them to fascism and torture the seniors. Before this day, he always talked about how the Soviet Union would one day help them with a mass migration to Russia. After the shooting, he now tells them that the Soviet Union won't take them in now because of the murders. There is a 45-minute audio recording of him talking to his followers as they drink the cyanide Kool-Aid. I'll leave a link down below so you can listen. You can hear kids and people crying out, but you also know that there are many people who are silently following his orders with no hesitation. There is a woman who tries to call him out and speaks about just leaving to Russia and that the kids deserve to live. But she was quieted by Jim and his armed gunmen who surrounded the group. You can hear him telling parents to calm their children down and to tell them death is their friend and that this is a good thing that's happening and to not be afraid. It's clear these people were completely brainwashed. They were running on little to no sleep because Jim Jones kept them busy, and after years of this, it becomes easy not to be able to think for yourself, especially when you believe that the man you're following believes in all the things that you believe in. Social justice and equality for all. Kids were fed the Kool-Aid first and then the adults. If people refused to drink the mixture, they were injected with it. Families were told to lie down together. After witnessing his followers drink the cyanide, Jones shot himself in the head. His son believes that he wasn't a man who could have shot himself in the head and that he had someone else do it for him. But 2 autopsies suggest suicide. He also thought his father was a coward for not drinking the cyanide like everyone else. He thinks he saw the pain it caused everyone and he didn't want to suffer through that pain. Some people escaped the mass murder while it happened. A 76-year-old woman hid under her bed the entire night. She came out the next morning to find almost 1,000 bodies laying lifeless on the ground.
How very much I've loved you. How very much I've tried my best to give you the good life. But in spite of all of that I've tried, a handful of our people with their lies have made our life impossible. There's no way to detach ourselves from what's happened today. Not only we're in a compound situation, not only are there those who have left and committed the betrayal of the century, some have stolen children from others and they're in pursuit right now to kill them because they stole their children. And we are sitting here waiting on a powder keg. I don't think this is what we want to do with our babies. I don't think that's what we had in mind to do with our babies. It was said by the greatest of prophets from time immemorial, no man takes my life from me, I lay my life down. So to sit here and wait for the catastrophe that's going to happen on that airplane, it's going to be a catastrophe. Almost happened here. Almost happened. The congressman was nearly killed here. But you can't steal people's children. You can't take off with people's children without expecting a violent reaction. And that's not so unfamiliar to us either. Even if we were Judeo-Christian, if we weren't communists, the world, the kingdom suffereth violence, and the violence shall take it by force. If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace.
Well, there you have it, the sad story of the Jonestown Massacre. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and share, and I hope I see you next week when I do another film review and spooky story narration. Also, if you'd like to join the Rainbow Fright Freight Train, go ahead and hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell. That way you'll get notified every Thursday and Friday when I post more videos like this. All right, y'all. Peace.